Good afternoon. Welcome to St. Francis Sermon at 6. Hope you're well. If you're not met before, my name is Andy. I'm the church leader at St. Francis. And over the day, we have had our 9 o'clock traditional service, our 10:45 all in together service. We've just had 4 p.m. modern service, and there's Christmas carol choir rehearsals going on right now down at church. And we are in the middle of a series on the book of Ezra. If you're on our YouTube page or on our own Facebook page. If you're on the We Love Mackworth one, you won't see this, but I've just put links to the Ezra 4 and 5 passages. We have read from those before the service, and I'm preaching from that. So I'm going to hand over to me. I'm dressed quite smartly because it's the 9 o'clock service. I've got my dog collar on and got a jacket on. I was leading and preaching this morning and this afternoon. But I will leave you with this afternoon service and pray that God speaks to you through it.
Seen those kind of videos on Instagram or TikTok. You've got Instagram versus reality. And I don't know if you found it, but sometimes the Christian life can be presented as like the picture on the left-hand side. There's an expectation. We've got God's promises. We've got his presence. We've got his peace. And yet actually when you get into it, it feels a lot more like it is on the right. It's really hard work. And if you've been following Jesus for any time at all, you'll have found that so often that is the reality. In recent weeks, at the 10:45 and the 4, we started singing a song called The Blood. And it begins like this. It says, everything's changed. It's getting harder to recognize the person I was before I encountered Christ. I don't walk like I used to. I don't talk like I used to. I've been washed from the inside. And often when we start to follow Jesus, maybe our families at best think we've gone weird and at worst think we've been brainwashed. That's what they thought of my wife Rachel. Our colleagues don't understand why our language has changed, and maybe our Friday evenings out with colleagues aren't going out with colleagues, or if they are, then we're on a cola rather than something else. We wonder, people around us going, why is they not jumping in on the gossip? Or trying to care for that person they find irritating, or maybe the person you find irritating, you've got a little bit more patience with. And maybe as you sit and you watch a film or you read an article or you're scanning through your reels, you're like, oh, that doesn't quite sit right with me. The author John Mark Comer writes in his book, Live No Lies, why does every day feel like a battle just to stay faithful, to keep following Jesus? Here's an idea. Maybe because it is. And friends, as we come to the halfway point in our series on Ezra, we've been looking at this for a few weeks now, we find God's people encountering a battle to stay faithful, to just keep going. They're facing opposition. And if you've missed the past 2 weeks, you can catch up online. Patrick spoke at the 9, I spoke at the 10:45. They fit together really nicely. You can find them on our YouTube. And the week before we started it, and Patrick again shared there. But just in summary, God's people have been in exile in Babylon. They've been taken away from their home country. They're in, think about modern-day Iraq. And they've just been told they can go home. And so they head back to Jerusalem and they start rebuilding their houses and rebuilding the city and rebuilding the temple. And everything is going wonderfully. It's like those pictures on the left. The Instagram reel is beautiful. The sunset's coming down as they're finishing all the works. And they're like, oh, this is amazing. And then things begin to get difficult. And as we couldn't read the whole of chapters 4 and 5, I wasn't really mean to Sal this week. I know, Andy, we made you try and read loads of difficult names, and that's the problem with Ezra. There's lots of names nobody really knows how to pronounce because, to be honest, my ancient Hebrew and Aramaic is not great. But what we do is we find them rebuilding. And then Zerubbabel and Joshua say no to these people that want to say, we want to help you. And so they get irritated and they bribe officials to work against the work. And then we find them writing to the king of Persia to get the work to stop, which it does. And then we pick that up in chapter 6 next week. Now, friends, here we are not building a physical temple, although we have sorted out some carpets and got new chairs, and there's going to be some new toilets next year and other things. But we do face opposition following Jesus. And there are 3 particular ways we can find opposition that these guys faced. And I would say I've faced in my life, and I imagine that you might as well. So, if you have chapter 4, verse 1 open in front of you on page 588, we're just going to pick out a few little bits. Page 588. In verse 1 it says, the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard about the rebuilding. And then those enemies came to Zerubbabel and they said, we want to help you rebuild it. We like you. We worship your God. We offer sacrifices to him. Now, I would have thought if you went to a place and people came to you and they said, we're going to help you, and they say, we worship God like you, you're going to say, yes, we need all the help we can get. So it's a bit of a conundrum, really, thinking, why do they say no to these guys? So I had to do a little bit of digging, and in 2 Kings 17, verse 33, we find out what had happened to these people. It says, these people worship the Lord, but they also served their own gods. They followed the evil practices of the nations they'd been taken from. And these people became known as the Samaritans. And although we think of Samaritans as good because of the charity and because Jesus told a story about a good Samaritan, the reason why it was so shocking was they were not considered good at all. And what had happened is these people had been like this little solution here. They had allowed their faith to be diluted by the faith of the people around them. Yes, they served God. Yes, they worshipped him. But actually, they had taken on the practices of the nations around them. And that is so easy to happen. Got Jesus, and then we just allow it to be diluted by things around us. You see it as whole churches let go of the centrality of the scriptures or the uniqueness of Jesus. I remember when I was at theological college, vicar school, I heard this story of a church in the States that instead of doing bread and wine for communion and remembering Jesus' sacrifice, they celebrated with milk and honey and celebrated it to some kind of goddess. At that point, you have let go of anything that relates to Jesus Christ. I mean, just horrendous. I mean, that's diluted beyond anything I can imagine. I was shocked when I heard it. But there are little dilutions that happen bit by bit. For us, there's the danger that we have our faith in Jesus and then our families just, don't need to go to church that week. And again, we all miss church sometimes, but you can't do that. And it just gets diluted. And then you're watching a film and this doesn't sit quite right. And then the reels come up and that doesn't sit quite right. And then your colleagues are like, well, it just needs to do that. And it doesn't sit quite right. And then you're down the pub with friends and it just begins to get diluted. And before you know it, your faith is so diluted you look exactly the same as everybody else. Friends, Friday was Halloween. And I was wandering around. I nipped down to Heron to get a pizza. And I saw lots of kids running around and all sorts of things. But actually, one way we can dilute our faith is by seeking after other spiritual powers. And in a few weeks' time, there is a medium at Mecca Hall next door. And I know why people do it, because they want to reach out to something spiritual and they want to contact deceased relatives. I know why people do it. I'm not knocking that. But this is a no-no for followers of Jesus. We cannot go seeking after other spiritual powers. No tarot cards, no Ouija boards, no horoscopes, no manifesting. If you go seeking after a spiritual power, you are diluting following Jesus. And actually, it's really dangerous. The reason is not that God's trying to be a killjoy, but there are two places where spiritual power comes from: God and the enemy. And I don't say it to condemn anybody, but if it's not going after Jesus as revealed in the scriptures, you're going into a very, very dangerous place. Either it's a con man, or actually you could be tapping into something worse. The Bible's clear. You can't communicate with people who've died. Only the one who died and was raised to life, and he has all authority, all power. And in him we'll find hope and satisfaction and life after death. But there are many ways we can dilute our faith. We can say, oh yeah, I do worship God, I do offer sacrifices to him. But I remember, I've shared this before, but when I first started following Jesus significantly, I was 16 years old, and the favorite sort of music was rap music. It was the mid to late 90s. It was the era of Tupac and Dr. Dre and Bone Thugs and Harmony. And I know that means a lot to you, but it meant a lot to me back then. But it began to get a little bit of attention inside. I'm like, I'm not sure I can listen to this and go all out for Jesus. And nobody had a go at me for it. It didn't sit quite right. And what was happening was that music was just diluting my walk. And I was like, I've got to let go of that. My friend was very pleased when I gave him my CD collection, which is a big deal before Spotify. But friends, God isn't trying to be difficult. He's not trying to steal our fun. He wants the best for us. It's his kindness that leads us to repentance. He's not looking to condemn us, but he knows that what we need is fully concentrated 4 times. You know the stuff you get in Sainsbury's, like the 4 times concentrated. If you put in that much, it's like kills your teeth. That's the sort of faith Jesus is looking for. So let's not be like these enemies of Judah and Benjamin, committing to Jesus but allowing their faith to be diluted. So if that first opposition that you face is dilution, what next? Well, in verse 5, what does it say? So these nations paid some of the Jewish officials to work against the people of Judah. They wanted their plans to fail. And so the next thing we find is disunity. They get those on the inside to work against the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem and the temple. You see, God's plan has always been to call a people. It's never just been me and my relationship with Jesus. Now, that is vital, that is central, that is where it begins. But he's always been doing it together. And as you look around the room and you think, I'm not sure I like some of the other people in this room, or I'm not sure I know any of the people in the room, or I don't look like anybody else in this room, you are a gift to us as church, because that means that you represent a particular group of people or a particular background. And God is calling us together. It's why we have tea and coffee. It's why we do social events. It's why we do connect groups and alpha, and why we do football, and we do chatty crafters, and we do little lights, and we do open door, because we're seeking to grow community, and you can only grow community if you know one another. God's story started calling a family that he would use to bless the whole earth. And it ends with heaven coming to earth, and every tribe, every nation, every tongue before the throne of God. Always been calling us together. And so if he can get us disunited, disparate, separated, that's the hope of the enemy. And Jesus prayed in John 17 his church would be one. Now that doesn't mean that we simply just dilute everything to the lowest common denominator. But if we follow Jesus, we can say the creeds. We're following the way of Jesus and hold the scriptures highly, we can work together. And Nikki Gumbel, who does Alpha, which is a course we run for people exploring Christian faith, we've got 30 to 40 guests doing Alpha right now on a Tuesday night. He says, what unites us is infinitely more important than what divides us. Now, the church, unfortunately, over the last 2,000 years, has often been good at dividing. Great schism, Catholic and Protestant church, and then the Protestant church just splits and splits and splits and splits and splits and splits. And sometimes it's personality, sometimes it's secondary issues, sometimes it's quite important things, but it's not good. Friends, we can divide over silly things. At the 10:45, we have guitar-led worship. Now, that may not be your bag, it may not be my bag, but actually I think it works for our 10:45. At this service, we have more traditional hymns. Is one better than the other? No, it's not. But churches fall out over it. And it's easy to do so. And one of the things I found beautiful at St. Francis is we've got different expressions of church, but we are all keeping the main thing, the main thing. Does it mean we will always agree? No, it doesn't. Does it mean I always get things right? No, it doesn't. Does it mean the PCC, our trustee board, get things right? No, it doesn't. But the key is to not be disunited, but be united together in Christ. It means working together in unity, holding the same values and culture, following Jesus. One of the places we see this is Monday evening football. So there's 40 plus men each week playing football just up at Ricknell up the road. I don't go because I'm not great at football and I don't particularly enjoy it, but there's wonderful things going on, and a lot of people are finding it as a bridge into church or into Alpha, into relationship with Jesus, and those that aren't are still experiencing community and belonging and a place to get to know people. And just sometimes they have to remind people of the values. You encourage each other. You don't yell at each other. You kind of cheer one another up, watch your language, and they're building an encouraging community, but very, very occasionally they've had to say, I'm really sorry, you just cannot do that. And if you keep doing that, you won't be able to come back. And I think it's only been once or twice in 4 years they've had to say to somebody, you can't come back because your behavior just won't fit in. And so it just gets diluted. But actually, in the main, we're calling for unity. Patrick, every week on Tuesday morning at Zoom prayer, prays for unity because it's not something we can take for granted. We've got it in Christ, but it so easily drifts. And we'll face opposition through disunity. So, dilution, disunity. And we finally see further opposition in verse 6. They brought charges against the people of Judah. It happens when Xerxes began to rule over Persia. You see, the enemies of the rebuilders are looking to leverage political power against the people of God. And we see it all over the world. We see it in North Korea, illegal to follow Jesus. We see it in the 1040 window, which is the kind of area of the world spreading out from the Middle East, where it can be very dangerous to follow Jesus, and there can be legal pressure, persecution, torture, even death sometimes, not to follow Jesus. But in this country, in the main, we're allowed to do that. And I've got some leaflets which I'll put out from Evangelical Alliance saying legally what we are allowed to do in this nation. And as long as we're sensible and use our common sense, actually, we're allowed to do so. But distortion is a way in which people will oppose us. They opposed them here. They said that the city was evil. Did you pick that up? They said that the city would stop paying its taxes if they allowed this to happen. Now, friends, this city wasn't seeking to be evil. It was at this point in time, actually, unusually for the Israelites, being a good city. They're trying to rebuild homes and rebuild the city and rebuild the temple. And yet they're accused, they're distorted of being evil. It's happened throughout history. People distort what Christians believe. Did you know the earliest Christians were accused of being atheists because they didn't follow all the Roman gods? Did you know the early Christians were accused of being cannibals because they ate the blood and flesh of Jesus? There's truth in there, but it is distorted. And friends, over the years, I've been accused of, people have said, you think you're better than me because I've said Jesus is the only way. People have accused me of being hateful because I've said there are particular ways in which the scriptures call us to live. I've been accused of being fluffy because I've said that Jesus doesn't align with one political ideology. I've been challenged I've been challenged and accused of things because I've said God doesn't say that all Christians are going to be healthy and wealthy. Now, there's truth in all of those statements, but it's distorted. Now, we need to be really wise and gracious in how we speak. And sometimes I'm being a jerk. So I'm just being really unwise, really ungracious. And actually, it's not opposition. And I have to be careful I don't say it's opposition when it's just me being an idiot. But actually, when we step out for Jesus, don't be surprised if we get things coming back at us. It's difficult. But it is vital in all of this opposition, it's dilution or distortion or disunity, that we recognize where it is ultimately coming from. So in chapter 4, verse 6, it says this: the enemies of the Jews brought charges against the people of Judah. Other translations use the phrase brought accusations. And a very helpful commentary pulled out that accusation is the same word as accuser, the Satan, the devil. Very, very similar to what he does. You see, it's easy to think that this dilution and disunity and distortion are simply human problems, but they have a spiritual source. Priscilla Shirer says this. She says, this ain't no physical battle we're dealing with. No matter how much you may wish it to be, no matter how much better you'd feel if life was all five senses and manageable, we are at spiritual war. And so we need spiritual weapons. And in Ephesians 6, quite a famous verse, Paul says this: put on all of God's armor, then you can remain strong against the devil's evil plans. Our fight is not against human beings, it is against the rulers, the authorities, and the powers of this dark world. It is against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm. And there's that image that Paul would have been using, which had been well known to people at the time, of armor, and he takes it and applies it to the people of God. You see, it's easy to think that it's just that person opposing me, and actually, if you are pressing out for Jesus and they are opposing you because of your faith, it's coming from far above them. 1 Peter says, be watchful and control yourselves. Your enemy, the devil, is like a roaring lion. He prowls around looking for someone to be swallowed, for someone to swallow up. Don't be surprised if you have recently come to faith in Jesus, or you are stepping out for Jesus, you begin to experience spiritual attack. I remember speaking to one person who got baptized earlier this year because they'd come to faith earlier this year. And they said that evening they had the biggest moment of doubt they'd had so far. It was really weird. In the morning, they'd been baptized and proclaiming Jesus from the front and sharing their story, and they were baptized in the pool over here. And that night, what have I done? Do I even believe in God? And they just thought it was really weird. I thought, oh yeah, sorry about that. I probably should have told you. Spiritual battle when you step out for Jesus. And we talked about it. Oh, it was just so obvious. And so we rely on God's armor. And friends, if you want to think about this idea of kind of spiritual warfare and attack, I recommend these two books to you. One is an absolute classic, The Screwtape Letters, a fictional account of an older devil mentoring a younger devil. It's very amusing. My daughter Tibby has just started reading it at the moment. She's really enjoying it. If you've not read it, the language is a little bit old school, but it's just a wonderful, wonderful book. And the other one is much newer, called Live No Lies, and it says, recognize and resist the 3 enemies that sabotage your peace. And this week's Alpha group on Tuesday night is on how can I resist evil, which interestingly aligns with all that's going on. But friends, we do not live in Jerusalem and we're not rebuilding the temple. We live in 2025 in Mackworth. And we have a difference. You see, the difference between God's people in here and us is that we live after the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And Jesus faced these oppositions and far more for our sake. Jesus' opposition found him nailed to a Roman cross. And we can never forget that. He took all of that opposition. He took all of our opposition to God. And he hung on a cross for you and for me. And he defeated it in rising from the grave. Jesus has the victory. And that means that if I'm his follower, if I've been united to him, if I've submitted my life to him, I have his victory too. I'm on his side. And the theologian Tom Wright, N.T. Wright, says this: for Christians, we fight from victory, not for victory. The war is won. When Jesus rose from the dead, the war is won. And so all this talk of spiritual warfare and battles and opposition is not to frighten us. It's just to make us aware, because we fight from victory, not for victory. Jesus has won. And in John 16, Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble, but be encouraged. I've won the battle over the world. Or other translation says, I have overcome the world. So friends, I want to encourage you just to think for a moment, what opposition do you face in following Jesus? And perhaps for you, you're new to this or you've come back to this. You're thinking, actually, I allowed myself to step away. I've not even stepped into this yet. And I've been wavering on a knife edge, but I'm here this morning and I think I want to find out more about what it looks like to follow Jesus, even though it often looks like the pictures on the right, not the Instagram image. You see, the Christian life is no filtered Instagram reel. It is beautiful, yes, because we follow the one who created us, who loves us, who gives us purpose and meaning and life in all its fullness. But we also face great brokenness and a battle involving dilution and disunity and distortion. But Jesus has won the war. And that changes everything.